There is something your person has already decided, but you have not been told yet. And the most dangerous part is not their decision. It is how calm they have become while making it. Because when someone stops reacting, stops explaining, and stops arguing, it is not peace, it is preparation. And what I am about to reveal will feel uncomfortable, because you will realize they were never drifting randomly. They were moving with intention, quietly, strategically, emotionally detached long before you noticed the silence. Now listen carefully, because this is where most people misunderstand everything. You think distance means confusion. You think silence means healing. You think their change in behavior is temporary. But in deeper psychological patterns of human attachment, sudden emotional calm is often the final stage before a decision becomes reality. Your person is not stuck between choices anymore.
They are living inside a choice they have already made internally, and the only reason you have not felt the full impact yet is because they have not executed it outwardly. They are watching you now in a different way, not with emotional involvement, but with evaluation. Every interaction is being recorded internally. Every reaction from you is confirming something in their mind. And the most painful truth, you may still be trying to fix something they have already mentally completed. Welcome to the Jung Code, where we explore the hidden layers of human behavior, emotional shifts, and the unspoken psychology behind relationships. In today's video, we're diving into the subtle signs that reveal when someone's energy starts changing before they ever say a word. If you find value in these insights, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what most people overlook. When someone suddenly pulls away emotionally, most people assume they are confused or unsure. But in many real-life situations, especially in close relationships, emotional withdrawal is not random. It often reflects something that has already been forming internally for a while. People usually don't wake up one day and change completely without any inner process. Instead, small disappointments, repeated misunderstandings, or unmet emotional needs can slowly build up in their mind until they reach a quiet conclusion about the relationship or the connection. At first, they may still stay engaged outwardly. They might still talk, respond, or act normal, because they are trying to understand their own feelings or see if anything changes. But internally, they start observing more than participating. Their attention shifts from expressing emotions to analyzing situations. This is where the distance begins, even if nothing obvious has happened yet. To the outside world, everything may still look the same, but their emotional involvement is no longer at the same level. This stage is often misunderstood because there is no direct confrontation or clear explanation. Instead of expressing everything, they may choose silence or reduced communication. That silence is not always confusion. Sometimes it is the result of already forming a personal conclusion and trying to emotionally detach from it. People often process decisions privately before they ever show them in behavior. By the time the change becomes visible, the emotional shift has usually already happened inside them. That is why it feels sudden to the other person, even though it was gradual for the one experiencing it. The mind often prepares for emotional separation long before the actual distance appears in real life, making the final behavior seem faster than the internal journey that led to it. Silence in human behavior is rarely as empty as it looks from the outside. When someone becomes quiet or less expressive in a relationship, people often assume nothing is happening in their mind. But in reality, silence can carry a lot of internal activity. A person may stop speaking openly, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are processing thoughts privately instead of expressing them outwardly. This shift usually happens when emotional expression starts to feel less effective or less safe for them. In many cases, silence becomes a form of observation. Instead of reacting to every situation, the person begins to watch patterns more closely. They notice how conversations go, how conflicts unfold, and how their emotional needs are being met or ignored. This is not always done consciously in a structured way. It is often a natural mental adjustment where the person starts stepping back internally to understand the situation better, without interference from emotions in the moment. During this phase, silence can also be a way of reducing emotional exposure. When someone feels overwhelmed or uncertain, they may stop sharing everything they feel because expressing it no longer brings clarity or relief. So they begin holding things back, not necessarily to punish the other person, but to protect their own mental space while they think things through. This creates distance, even if no argument or obvious issue is present. At the same time, silence can also be part of decision-making. When people are unsure about a direction in a relationship or connection, they often stop verbal communication and rely more on internal reflection. The absence of words does not mean the absence of thought. In many situations, it means the thoughts have become deeper and more focused inwardly. This is why silence can sometimes feel heavy, because it is not just lack of speech, but a sign that something is being processed internally without being shared. People rarely communicate their true intentions directly in emotional situations. Instead, their behavior becomes the clearest indicator of what is shifting inside them. When someone's feelings start changing, they don't always announce it. They show it through small adjustments in how they act, respond, and engage. These changes are often subtle at first, which is why they are easy to miss or explain away. For example, someone who used to respond quickly may start taking longer without explanation. Someone who used to ask questions may become less curious. Someone who once initiated conversations may begin to wait instead. On the surface, each action might seem normal on its own, but when you look at the pattern, it starts to show a shift in emotional involvement. Behavior becomes less warm, less spontaneous, and more mechanical over time. What makes this difficult to notice is that people often continue behaving correctly on the outside while their internal interest is fading. They may still reply, still show up, still participate in conversations, but the emotional energy behind those actions is different. It becomes more like maintaining interaction rather than naturally flowing with it. This is where behavior starts speaking louder than words, because words may stay the same while the feeling behind them changes. Another important aspect is that people often test situations through behavior. They might reduce effort slightly to see how the other person reacts, or they might step back a little to observe whether they are being noticed. These small experiments are not always intentional or fully conscious, but they reveal what direction their thoughts are moving in. Over time, these patterns become clearer, and the emotional distance becomes more visible through consistent actions rather than a single moment. Emotional detachment rarely happens suddenly. It usually begins quietly inside a person, long before it becomes visible in their behavior. At first, they may still care, still respond, and still stay involved. But something shifts in how they process what they are feeling. Instead of reacting emotionally to situations, they start stepping back internally. They begin to observe more and feel less immediate emotional impact from the same interactions that once affected them deeply. This internal shift often starts when someone repeatedly experiences emotional fatigue or disappointment. It does not have to be a major event. Even small repeated moments of feeling misunderstood, unheard, or emotionally drained can slowly reduce how much they invest internally. Over time, the mind adapts by creating distance as a form of self-protection. That distance is not always a conscious decision. It often develops naturally as a response to emotional overload. As this continues, the person starts to separate their feelings from their actions. They may still behave normally in conversations, but internally they are no longer as emotionally present. Things that once triggered strong reactions may no longer feel as intense. They become calmer, but that calmness is not always peace. Sometimes it is a sign that emotional engagement is decreasing. This is why detachment can be hard to recognize early, because it does not always look like conflict. It often looks like quietness or neutrality. Another part of this process is mental self-realignment. The person starts focusing more on themselves, their thoughts, and their internal stability rather than the emotional dynamics of the relationship. They begin prioritizing clarity over expression. Instead of discussing every feeling, they start processing it privately. This creates a gradual shift where emotional connection weakens internally first, even if everything still appears normal externally for a while. When someone begins to see you differently, it is rarely an instant change. It usually happens through a slow internal rewriting of how they interpret your behavior, your reactions, and your overall presence in their life. They are no longer responding to you based only on what you are doing now, but also based on conclusions they have already formed over time. This means the version of you they interact with in their mind may not fully match who you are in the present moment. This shift often develops after repeated emotional experiences, both positive and negative. Over time, the mind starts to build a pattern of expectations. If those expectations are not consistently met, or if emotional experiences feel unbalanced, a person may begin to simplify their perception of the relationship. Instead of seeing nuance, they start seeing categories like safe, stressful, reliable, or uncertain. Once this happens, their reactions become based more on these mental labels than on individual moments. What makes this important is that people rarely communicate this change directly. They do not usually say, "I see you differently now." Instead, it shows up in how they respond, how they engage, and how much emotional openness they allow. Even if you try to act differently later, their internal conclusion may still influence how they interpret your actions. This is because their perception has already started organizing your behavior into a certain narrative. Another layer of this is emotional memory. People often remember how they felt in past interactions more strongly than the details of what was said. So even if things improve later, earlier emotional impressions can still shape how they interpret current behavior. This is why it can feel like someone is reacting to a version of you that you are no longer expressing, because internally they are still anchored to earlier emotional conclusions they formed during the connection. When emotional energy changes in a relationship, it rarely shifts equally for both people at the same time. In most situations, one person starts to feel a gradual internal pull away, while the other is still fully emotionally invested. This creates an imbalance where both individuals are no longer in the same emotional space, even though they may still be interacting normally on the surface. This shift usually begins quietly. One person starts to feel less emotionally responsive, not because they suddenly stop caring, but because their internal emotional connection starts to weaken. At the same time, the other person may still be trying to maintain closeness, fix small issues, or understand what has changed. This difference in emotional engagement creates a growing gap that is not always immediately visible in daily interactions. What makes this situation difficult is that physical presence and emotional presence are not the same thing. A person can still reply, still talk, and still be involved in conversations, while internally they are already less attached. This creates a feeling of confusion for the other person, because everything looks normal in behavior, but something feels different in energy and response. That difference is often the emotional distance that is forming quietly. As this continues, the emotionally distancing person begins to rely more on internal reasoning than emotional reaction. They start making decisions based on how they feel overall, rather than how they feel in individual moments. Meanwhile, the other person may still be reacting emotionally, trying to restore what feels like a fading connection. This mismatch creates the experience where one person feels like they are still in the relationship fully, while the other is already transitioning out of it internally, even before anything is openly said or finalized. In the end, what this really shows is how quietly human emotions can change without clear signals in the beginning. Most people expect shifts in relationships to be loud, obvious, or directly communicated, but in reality, a lot of it happens internally first. By the time you notice distance, the emotional process behind it has often already been unfolding for a while inside the other person. It is also important to understand that not every silence means something negative, and not every change in behavior is a hidden warning. Sometimes people are simply processing life, emotions, or personal thoughts in their own way. But what often creates confusion is when you are still emotionally present while the other person is slowly becoming less emotionally engaged. That difference in timing can make everything feel sudden, even when it wasn't. The main takeaway is awareness. When you start noticing shifts in communication, energy, or emotional presence, it is better to observe calmly instead of rushing to assumptions or reactions. Human connections are complex, and people move through their emotions at different speeds. Some move forward internally long before anything changes externally. And sometimes, the most important understanding is this: not everything that changes is meant to be forced back into its old form. Some changes are signs that something is evolving, and recognizing that early can help you respond with clarity instead of confusion. If this message helped you see things more clearly, make sure you like and subscribe to the Jung Code for more deep insights into human behavior and relationships. And if you made it this far, comment the word "aware" below, so I know you truly understood the message and are paying attention to the subtle shifts most people miss.